March. That's when everything sort of started to fall apart. One evening we were meant to meet up to go out after I finished work, but Simon stood me up. He is the most caring, respectful, genuine person you would ever meet, so it was completely unlike him to do something like that. But I was stood around like a complete wally waiting for him for ages, texting him, leaving voice messages, until he finally sends me a feeble text back saying he's unwell or something. When I finally got a hold of him, after a couple of days of him giving me the runaround, he told me that on the way to meet me, he'd seen this drunken tramp who he was convinced was his father. Bear in mind, it's a man who he's not seen since he was 10 or 11, so he freaked out and left. When he decided he should go back, he'd gone, completely disappeared like a ghost. And Simon became completely obsessed with trying to find this bloke who he was convinced was his dad. He'd walk the streets for hours asking people about him, but this tramp was nowhere to be found. And I tried to reason with him that surely it wasn't his dad, but he was completely insistent that it was him. April was probably the hardest month of my life. Simon was completely different. He'd regressed almost. He was like this little lost boy. Seeing who he thought was his dad had woken something in him, something very deep. I mean, he was never the most open of books, but I thought this was the sort of thing he could talk to me about. But he'd become completely impossible to talk to, and we were arguing loads, which we'd never ever do normally. I mean, we'd only argue over the dumbest of things. Like, I playfully stopped talking to him for an hour because he didn't like my Game of Thrones finale theory. I don't even think it was an hour, actually, and anyway, even after it aired, he agreed that my finale idea was better anyway. But now we were getting into these unbelievable rows over absolutely nothing. May was when it was all over. We'd known each other for forever, and I was convinced he was my soulmate. We'd both only ever been in one proper long-term relationship, and that was with each other. I mean, we'd never spoke about our future plans, but I naively assumed we were on the same page. Like, my plans weren't anything grand or unusual. I wanted children, and I wanted his children. I wanted a place to call our own, and I wanted us to get married. When I tried to explain these things to him, just so that we were both on the same page, he told me he didn't want to have kids because he didn't want to disappoint them. He told me he didn't want to get married because he didn't want to let me down. And he said he didn't want to buy a place together because there were so many people who didn't have a place to call their own. Like, there's people you will put your life on hold for, and I would have put my life on hold for him if I thought this obsession of his, trying to find this ghost who he thought was his father, would either end or resolve itself. And after one final row, that was it. June is when we should have been celebrating our anniversary. If we'd still been together, we would have been going out for 5 years. Funnily enough, on the day that was supposed to be our anniversary, I bumped into his stepdad in Asda. It was nice seeing him, but he told me Simon wasn't doing so good. But it was seeing his stepdad that was one of the many occasions that kept reminding me of just how little I knew Simon, even though we'd been together that long. You see, I didn't actually realise that the people who I thought was his dad and brother were actually his stepdad and stepbrother. You'd never know, they have a brilliant relationship. But it was only whilst talking to his stepbrother that he told me they were step relations. We'd been going out for 6 months by that point. July is when I went out with Steve. My friend Steph set us up. He was a very sweet guy, but painfully dull. The only saving grace was that I could go out on a date and actually have a drink. I mean, when I was with Simon, I'd only ever go out for a drink with the girls. Not only did Simon not drink, but he became incredibly nervous around people who did. I mean, when I found out his dad was a homeless alcoholic, it kind of made sense. Needless to say, there was no second date. No, August is when we were supposed to go on holiday together. It was booked way before a breakup was even imaginable. Yeah, we decided early on that Steph would go with me and she'd reimburse him. Yeah. It was another moment for me though where it was just brought home to me how little I knew or understood about Simon. Like, he was more than happy to go abroad with me on a plane, but for love nor money I could never get him on a train. Like, my friends all thought he was a bit of an eco-nut because he used to ride a bike everywhere, but I knew that wasn't why he never learned to drive. September's always the month I hate the most. Summer's over and the seasons change. Usually quite drastically and almost overnight, and it always depresses me. And I can't stand it. This September seems colder, darker and greyer without Simon though. October is when Simon randomly called me out of the blue. He excitedly told me that he finally tracked down his dad, who, crazily enough, was the drunken man who he'd seen on the streets, but was now clean and sober for the first time in years and engaged to be married. Like, lucky him. He'd arranged to meet up with his dad and his fiancée, the first time they'd have seen each other in over a decade, and he wanted me to go with him for moral support. I wasn't sure I wanted to, but I could tell he wasn't asking me because he wanted me to be there, but because he needed me to be there. When I asked him if he'd been seeing anyone, he seemed incredibly offended. Clearly he hadn't. He'd been focused on finding his father. I was really pleased for him. Hopefully he could start to build a better life for himself. Grow and move on from all that had happened to him in the past. The times that haunted him that he refused to even tell me about. November was the time I went on the weirdest double date I'd ever been on. After much indecision, I had agreed to go with Simon to meet his dad. I wasn't really sure what to expect. I sort of anticipated that his dad would be a bit scruffy. Not like a tramp, but like a tramp who'd been pulled off the streets and given a new tracksuit and told to have a shave. But he was very smartly dressed and was also very sincere and a warm person. He was basically how I imagined Simon would be 30 years from now. Oh, and his fiancée, which is lovely too. The conversation, though, was fixed firmly on the future, and no one seemed to want to talk about the past. And seeing the two of them, father and son, reconnect after all this time was something quite special. There was so much about them that was similar. Oh my god, they hadn't seen each other for years, but their mannerisms, speech patterns, humour and kindness was all the same. And as the night went on, I witnessed the boy who Simon had regressed to back in March starting to become a man again. And it was lovely to see. His heart was beginning to heal, but mine still felt shattered. December, we were sort of dating again. We'd go out, hold hands, have meals, but that was it. I'd hoped after he'd reconnected with his dad that Si might want to push our relationship further, but he didn't seem inclined to. And to be honest, neither did I. We were just enjoying each other's company, and it was great. He wanted to spend Christmas with his dad, which was totally understandable. They had a fair few to catch up on. But he said he wanted to spend New Year's Eve with me. After the clock struck 12 and all the Auld Lang Syne and fireworks shenanigans, we went on a walk. In the middle of the night. He took me to this crappy old park round the corner from his mum's house where we used to hang out when we were teenagers. And under the moonlight, he got down on one knee and proposed to me. A year prior to that, that's all I ever wanted from him. But we were barely back together and we were still slowly building back up our relationship. I told him not yet. January was his father's wedding, an understandably alcohol-free affair. Simon was his dad's best man, which was cute. His speech was a difficult one, though. They'd had 8 or 9 good years over a decade ago, bridged with over 10 years of pain. A period of time that he'd never even told me about before. When his dad asked me to dance, he said to me that hearing Simon reminisce about his childhood, and only his childhood, leaving out this massive gap where there was this huge time period just missing from their relationship, made him realise now more than ever that they'd lost so much. Too much. The future was bright, but the two of them would never get that time back. I don't want you two making similar mistakes, he said to me. But now it's getting towards the end of February. But it's not just any February. It's a leap year. And on the 29th, traditionally, the woman can ask the man to marry her. And he certainly is that now. A man. We've both grown so much and lost so much. Too much. And I don't want to let a single second slip by, so I hope he says yes.